I'll literally be taking my shirt off over my head, and then my arm will start to come out of the socket. And then the absolute panic that follows, because I know that pain is coming, I can't even begin to describe it. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist, and today I'm talking to you about hypermobile spectrum disorders, also known as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Hypermobile spectrum disorders refers to a range of subtypes of a connective tissue disorder. HSD is remarkably common among neurodivergents. I've seen it in many friends who are neurodivergents, and I've seen some of the symptoms in clients. And many of them are often not diagnosed because it's a relatively new diagnosis. Prior to 2017, I believe it was referred to under different terms. I remember reading a term benign hypermobility. And I think up to that point, hypermobility was viewed as, for the most part, not that detrimental to the individual. And what we understand now is that it is a multisystemic disorder that affects all parts of the body and has some pretty serious implications for those who experience it. Typically for HSD, the diagnostic journey can take many years because it's often overlooked or the symptoms are ascribed to other things. An analogy I've heard used, it's kind of like a bunch of blind men who meet an elephant for the first time and they're touching different parts of the elephant, and one of them will touch the trunk and think it's a vacuum hose. Someone will touch the leg and think it's a tree. And medical professionals are just like this. They'll experience one trait or symptom and they'll assume it's some other condition and they'll fail to look at the whole system. And this is partially the result of this being a relatively new diagnosis. And I don't imagine a lot of people get training in it because it's still really new. Connective tissue disorders affect a layer of tissue called the fascia, which is throughout the entire body. For me, I have joints that are hypermobile, in particular this shoulder, so it can sublux, meaning it partially comes out of the socket. Any sudden movement, any jarring movement, any rocking of my body, or overextending in certain positions, it will start to come out. And if I'm not careful, it'll completely dislocate. If you've ever dislocated a joint, you know how incredibly painful that can be. So I try generally not to let that happen. Granted, it's kind of impossible to not go through life as somebody with a connective tissue disorder and not run the risk of this happening. As I described in the opening, I can be taking a shirt off and it will happen. One time I was riding a bike and I went off the curb onto the road, and the motion of the bike hitting the road jarred my arm out of the socket. And I was cycling at something like 5 a.m. in the morning. I like to go cycling early when it's cool and there isn't traffic. So here I was in the middle of the road at 5 a.m. with my arm dislocated. There was a car coming towards me. I was screaming and bellowing into this suburban neighborhood at the top of my lungs because the pain was horrible. Eventually, I was able to get it back into the socket. It has this kind of meaty thunk sensation, and then the pain continues to radiate from that area for the rest of the day. And then the arm is more prone to subluxing or dislocating if I'm not careful in the future. A couple of years ago, I was playing dodgeball, and I squatted and pivoted, and I experienced this incredible pain in there, and I was unable to stand on that leg for a while. That pain ended up being me having torn my meniscus and ACL, and I had to do surgery to get that repaired and go through at least 7 months of rehab. That was one of the more dramatic examples of how HSD manifests for me. And on a day-to-day basis, it shows up in a variety of other ways. For example, I have tissue that's pretty flexible and can tear quite easily. I'll be opening an Amazon package and the exterior of the package might scrape my skin somehow and then tear the skin. And so I end up with a bunch of random scratches and grazes on my skin. And it will take a long time to heal as well. Slow wound healing is a big thing with HSD. It'll take upwards of a week for a small scratch sometimes to heal. And I don't know if you can see this, but I have a scratch here or a graze that's still healing. I was getting something out of the closet and something fell down and kind of skidded down my nose and grazed it. The best way to describe what it's like having very flexible skin is that it kind of sloughs off like a very thin piece of parchment, and I could see the layer of skin just kind of hanging there. I was like, oh, great. I'm now going to have this big mark on my face. That was, for me, a classic HSD moment where a small bump ended up developing into this very visible graze that took forever to heal. I often have cold in my extremities, like my fingers and toes. Right now, they're freezing. If I wash my hands during the cooler months, I can go outside and then my hands will freeze. And then even if I'm wearing gloves or putting them inside my pockets, they won't warm up. I have dysautonomia. And for me, this shows up as needing to drink a lot of water all the time. And it just goes right through me. I have POTS, which is post-orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, meaning my blood volume pulls in my legs. When I stand up, I get dizzy. I get chronic fatigue. I have to consume a lot of water and salt as a result. So that links back to the dysautonomia. For years, I had sleep issues that couldn't be explained. I went and did a sleep study. They couldn't find anything. I tried a lot of conventional approaches to addressing insomnia. Didn't work. It was only when I discovered HSD and the recommended medication regimen for that I was able to get some relief. As I mentioned, chronic fatigue is an issue. So I try to wake up early and get most of the labor-intensive stuff done early in the morning because I know by the afternoon I'll be tired and not have the will to want to do stuff. Mental health challenges can also present with HSD. So for years, I suffered from depression and anxiety. And even after treating what I thought were the causes of it, they still hung around. And it was clearly biologically based. Another common condition that presents with HSD is irritable bowel syndrome. So basically your bowel, it usually contracts like this, right, to move food along. And with IBS, it either moves too fast or too slow. And so this causes a variety of issues in the gut. Additional to this, I experience MCAD, mast cell activation disorder. It's an autoimmune, autoinflammatory condition. In the case of many HSDers, this is the less extreme version, and it's dietary related. So eating foods that are high in histamine or trigger histamine release can result in many IBS-like symptoms. Trigger foods tend to be stuff that's processed, aged, cured, stored for long periods. And when you combine the things you can eat as a result of IBS with the stuff you can't eat as a result of MCAD, your options get pretty slim. So I'm on a permanently restricted diet. I eat the same meals every day. The portions are calculated to not send me over the precipice in terms of what my tolerance is. I take a lot of medications and supplements to manage my body's reaction to the food and try to decrease the symptoms. MCAD symptoms are similar to histamine poisoning, which is what happens when you eat seafood or fish that is too old. Nausea, gut issues. I also get allergy type symptoms like my nose congesting, getting wheezy in the chest, getting all phlegmy in the throat. I get hives, rashes. So I had all these problems for years, and it took me so long to piece together all the different symptoms and challenges I had into one coherent diagnosis. And when I got it, it was a moment of relief because I finally had validation that it wasn't all in my head, that I wasn't being a hypochondriac. For many people with HSD or EDS, accessing specialized care can be difficult. Many people don't understand how it works. You might need a referral to see a specialist like a rheumatologist, a geneticist. Getting screened is the first hurdle, and then getting advice and guidance from somebody who knows what they're talking about is another. I had to do a lot of self-educating to understand what my needs were and how I could treat it. A really good resource is the Ehlers-Danlos Society YouTube account. They post a lot of videos from their annual conference with leading experts who have golden nuggets of advice to share about managing the symptoms and coping with the repercussions of having a connective tissue disorder. As I mentioned in the beginning, neurodivergents are more likely to be diagnosed with HSD or EDS than the general population. There are some studies that suggest maybe the development of autism and ADHD is correlated with whatever's causing HSD, EDS. There's some kind of link there. Still early days in terms of the research and understanding how it works. But the fact that it co-presents means that neurodivergents are struggling on many levels, not just with their neurodivergence and living in an ableist society. They're also dealing with health problems for which they're often unable to access adequate help. With a diagnosis, there are ways to manage the worst of the symptoms, and I'm happy to say that I can get by pretty well compared to where I was 5 years ago prior to getting my diagnosis. I do physical therapy exercises once a week to condition my body my arms are more likely to come out of the socket if I don't strengthen the right muscles to prevent that from happening. I have to be very careful about what I eat and take my supplements so I can decrease the symptoms if I'm eating something that I shouldn't be eating. I take an assortment of prescription medications to help me sleep at night, and for the first time in my life, I'm able to sleep really well. I do wake up during the night, but my sleep quality is significantly better, and I feel more rested when I wake up, as opposed to waking up and then shuffling through my day like a zombie because I'm so drained from the lack of restorative sleep I had the night before. I've had to sacrifice a lot of activities that I would have liked to have done. For example, I'm not going back to any kind of competitive ball sports because the motion of throwing things, this over the arm motion, immediately I can feel it hurting and feeling uncomfortable. It puts me at more risk of injury. I try not to do any high intensity activities that could result in a subluxing joint or dislocation. Even on a day-to-day basis, I try to be very careful about how I move. I know I tend to be quite clumsy, which could be a neurodivergence trait. Impaired motor skills is something that presents with ADHD and autism. I have a tendency to run into things a lot, which can result in cuts and scrapes and bruises. So I have to walk very carefully and be mindful of what I'm doing and not be inattentive and hyperactive and rushing from one place to another, because then I'm at risk of injuring myself. For example, the other day I was playing chasey with my dog and we were racing around the couch and I slipped and fell and my shoulder got jarred by that and almost came out again. And it was a reminder that I have to still be very careful, that even with my physical therapy, there is a tendency for this arm to come out. I can strengthen it. I can decrease the potential of it coming out, but I'm still hypermobile. In terms of managing my fatigue, spoon theory teaches us that those with chronic illness and neurodivergence have a limited amount of spoons that they can spend on everyday activities. And I've had to be very mindful about where I spend those spoons, not stacking my day with too much activity, not leaving intense activities towards the end of the day when I won't have the energy to do the things I need to do. Diet-wise, I mentioned I'm on an IBS, the low FODMAP diet, and I'm also on the low histamine diet. I was able to find great resources for managing it. For IBS, Monash University publishes an app which has up-to-date ratings of what foods you can and can't eat and how big the portion should be. For mast cell activation disorder, if you Google Swiss histamine diet, MCAD, or MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, you'll find there's a list of things that you can and can't eat, and it also rates it in terms of histamine content or, high potential to release histamine. I use both of those to guide me in terms of what I eat and how big each portion size should be. Everybody's body is different, so some people will have greater tolerance and lesser tolerance for certain foods. The best thing you can do is work with a dietitian or keep a food diary and monitor what you eat to see what your tolerance level is for each individual food item. It took me years of experimentation to figure out what I could and couldn't eat and in what portion, but now that I found a balance, I can get by on a day-to-day without suffering any of the usual symptoms. I feel the closest thing to normal that I felt in years, and that's all through self-education, symptom management, and being mindful and proactive about dealing with this chronic illness. If you're neurodivergent and you suffer from various symptoms that aren't explained by other diagnoses, there's a possibility that you might qualify for a HSD or EDS diagnosis. I recommend, if you're interested in learning more, to check out some videos on YouTube, Google, research, and then talk to your PCP. You can also request a referral to see specialists so they can screen you for HSD or EDS. Believe me when I say that this could be the best decision you ever make. If you are suffering from these symptoms, it will help you understand your needs and adjust for those needs better and give you much greater quality of life. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel and share it with anyone you think would benefit from watching it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.